Well, good morning, all. Thank you for attending this morning. I was just waiting for the bells of the clock tower to finish chiming before I started, but I thought it was done. Now I can still hear them going. I want to recognize as we get started the chair of the Library Advisory Board, Professor John Coleman. If you might just say hello, John.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today.
And I want to welcome you. Just a couple comments that this Awards for Excellence is sponsored by the Library Advisory Board. It's the 12th annual awards program to promote and recognize excellence in student research. The awards program encourages students to utilize the wealth of information available at Booth Library. So it's one of the criterion we ask when reviewing the entries is how they use resources from Booth Library and how they use Booth Library to enhance their studies. The award recipients were selected on the basis of excellence, creativity, and the use of research resources. And the winning entries will become a part of the Booth Library Student Research and Creativity Collection in the Keep. So without too much delay, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Professor Lori DeRuiter-Willems, who will introduce the undergraduate winners and let them speak to introduce their research projects. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Well, it's my honor to introduce the undergraduate winners today. Just for a little housekeeping, so everyone knows how we're going to do this, I'll introduce the first place winner, ask them to share their research or creative activity, and then we'll do the same for the second and the third. So the first place winner is Paul Abraham, a public health student who won first place for voluntary refusal of this, excuse me, I apologize, that beep startled me. Let me start over here. Voluntary refusal of seasonal influenza vaccine. Paul, congratulations, it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to apologize for the title of that. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but really, I'd just like to thank everybody here for this award. It's truly an honor to be recognized in this way and to see so many people interested in not only my research, but all the awesome research being presented. So my research study, voluntary refusal of the seasonal influenza vaccine among college students, aims to examine students' knowledge and attitudes about the seasonal influenza vaccine in order to understand possible barriers to vaccination for these groups. Previous studies of older adults have correlated influenza vaccination rates to rates of insurance coverage, leading them to somewhat dismiss low vaccination rates among young adults. But the 2012 Affordable Care Act expansion of insurance coverage for children under 26 allows for this assumption to be challenged somewhat. So this research is based on a survey conducted in February of 2020. The survey had a convenient sample of 199 undergraduate participants between the ages of 18 and 26. The survey asked questions regarding how long the student has had insurance over the past 5 years, how often the student received influenza vaccination, and questions about the student's attitudes surrounding influenza and the influenza vaccine. Some examples are, well, basically if the student was willing or planning to receive the influenza vaccine. I found that 97% of students were aware that the university offers flu shots free of charge to students, but only 58% of students were planning to receive the flu shot in the coming fall. 89% of the students that participated had health insurance coverage over the past 5 years, and 95% of the students had coverage for 3 or more of the past 5 years. 88% of the students said that they saw a healthcare provider at least once a year, but only 54% of the students, 54% of the students said that their healthcare provider recommended the influenza vaccine during less than half of the visits that they had with them. 17% said that they had never been recommended to have the flu shot by a healthcare provider. Of the 36% of students who hadn't received the influenza vaccine in the past 5 years, 86% of that group had health insurance coverage, and 83% of that group saw a healthcare provider at least annually. I also found that of those participants who hadn't received the influenza vaccine in the past 5 years, More than half didn't know they were recommended to receive the vaccine, but 65% considered themselves to be somewhat to extremely knowledgeable regarding influenza, and 55% consider themselves to be somewhat to extremely knowledgeable regarding the influenza vaccine. This shows a clear gap between the perceived knowledge and the actual understanding in regard to students' perceptions of the influenza vaccine. So the study produced a lot of results. I definitely don't have the time to share everything with you today, but all or most of the results point to the conclusion that the assumption that adult low vaccination rates or young adult low vaccination rates are because of problems with access, that may not be true. The results in the study show that direct information from a health educator or a healthcare provider may be a more successful intervention in increasing uptake of the seasonal influenza vaccine among young adults. It may be more successful than increasing access at this point in time. So this just allows us as health educators to focus our efforts in a more productive way than previous research may have implied. Really, that's all I've got for you. I just want to make sure I don't run too long. So I appreciate everybody's interest in my work. And again, I'd like to thank Booth Library and everyone involved for this award. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anybody that has any questions? Well, Paul, we'll have a poster session a little bit later today. I see some claps and thumbs up, so good job. If you want to check back in later during the afternoon sessions, Paul will also be available then. So thank you very much. So moving on to our second place is Penny Nye, a communication student. She won second place for cultivating a cohesive workplace by integrating soft skills training in professional development programs and resources. And Penny has a PowerPoint, I believe.
Yes.
So Penny, congratulations, and it's all yours.
Thank you. Let me just pull this up here. And I apologize, there's a train going by, of course. So mine had a rather long title too, so I'm sorry for that. But I want to thank you for this award. And I also want to thank you for providing the resources of the online Booth Library. As a non-traditional student and somebody being off campus, those resources really played an instrumental part in collecting my research data. So I'm excited about this research because as president of the U of I Staff Advisory Council, my mission has been to advocate for civil service employees. And one trend we noticed was that some employees are promoted to supervisory position with little to no experience, which often leads to a revolving door when new employees are hired to work for the same unqualified supervisor. So when asked to select a communications research topic last summer, my mind automatically turned to this issue. So I titled my work, Cultivating a Cohesive Workplace by Integrating Soft Skills Training and Professional Development Programs and Resources. I had three rationales for this research topic. First, as I mentioned, employees, especially civil service employees, are hired and promoted to supervisory role with little to no experience in managing people. Second, employees are not equipped to handle critical situations under pressure effectively. And third, there is a lack of efficient communication in the workplace that hinders the momentum toward productive teamwork and organizational success. Soft skills, or people skills, are basically the capacity to interact with others effectively. Unlike technical competence, soft skills are typically not taught in college curriculum or professional development programs. However, studies have found that soft skills such as effective communication, trust, decision-making abilities, reliable teamwork, critical thinking capabilities, empathy, and adaptability are just a few of the desired soft skills organizations seek in their employees. The rules for hiring a civil service employee differ from that of a public sector job. Hiring managers must interview only those few individuals who scored highest on the exam tailored for the open position. Therefore, an employee is evaluated and hired based mainly on vocational skills alone. Unfortunately, these positions are routinely upgraded to include supervising peers without any previous experience or training, which often leads to tragic outcomes in both employees. Ineffective supervisor-subordinate relationships hinder collaboration, are not inclusive, and provide no support to the employee, which impacts not only the supervisor and subordinate, but is also extremely costly to the organization. As I mentioned earlier, this leads to a revolving door when subsequent employees are hired, since the new employee will most likely have the same low-quality relationship with the supervisor without some type of intervention. In today's global, fast-paced environment with urgent deadlines and immediate crises, handling critical situations under pressure effectively is vital. Critical thinking is more than just breaking down the perceived information received, but also putting those pieces together to produce an informed thought. The ever-growing workload with rigid deadlines, coupled with decreasing staff, frequently leads to increased stress on employees. And even employees who are technical experts in their respective fields may lack these soft skills, which will impede them from performing well and contributing to the advancement of the organization. One study merged the two concepts of critical thinking and communication into what they called a critical dialogue, which moves beyond an individual asset to one of a whole group engagement during challenging conversations while maintaining mutual respect. Critical dialogue is essential when facing sensitive issues in today's workforce. In fact, the study referred to it as the ultimate survival tool. Unfortunately, many studies have shown that employees lack these soft skills that employees expect, just as they also agree that employers lack a robust support system to facilitate employees in obtaining these desired soft skills. However, my research showed that as more practical data is reported on the connection between soft skills training and organizational success, more employers are willing to invest in soft skills training programs. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, effective communication skills are extremely important for an organization's success, since this skill sets the foundation for other skill sets. Productive communication involves both parties not only articulating expectations clearly, but also listening carefully to produce positive attitudes and increase collaboration. Employees spend the bulk of their day communicating with others, and insufficient communication skills often lead to interpersonal conflict with peers and supervisors and cause unnecessary expenses to the organization. Furthermore, cultural and generational differences make precise communication even more complicated. Throw in the added technology difficulties and social media lingo, and communication has evolved to an entirely new level. And in today's COVID-19 world, virtual meetings are vital to continue working toward organizational goals, making this skill more important today than ever before. Effective communication skills have been proven in many experiments to enhance employee achievements, attain rewarding project outcomes, and limit workplace conflict. In conclusion, my research revealed there is a gap between employer expectations of adequate soft skills and those employees possess, namely effective communication, practical decision-making, objective critical thinking, and collaborative teamwork. Unfortunately, these customer service skills are hard to evaluate during the hiring process and are typically not learned in college curriculum, even though they make up more than 75% of a person's success. In fact, employees who fail to meet these expectations are set up for failure. Organizations that demand a holistic approach to solving problems seek employees that offer these comprehensive skill sets. Therefore, employees that desire high-quality jobs must combine these skill sets with a social emotional approach. Employees who master these skills become remarkable, inclusive leaders who sculpt productive, reliable employees that contribute to a successful organization. And as a result, soft skills must be integrated into professional development programs and resources to cultivate the cohesive collaboration needed to achieve personal career growth, foster workplace relationships, and promote organizational success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penny. Does anyone have questions for Penny?
Sorry, trying to move the thing so I can turn off my screen.
I've seen some applause, but I'm not seeing any questions. All right, last chance for questions for Penny. Penny, will you be in the research activity this afternoon?
I will not, sorry.
Okay. I'm sure we can get you anyone who has questions for her, if you want to ask directly in the chat, or we can get her email to you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome and congratulations. So our third place winner is Alexandra Mann, a history student. She won third place for the Women of Wrigley's Dainty Baseball League. And I saw the name, here you are, Alex. Would you like to share a little bit now?
Good morning, everybody. I also just wanted to say thank you for this. I love this paper and I love this topic, and congrats to everybody else who got an award as well. So to start, as a kid, I was a big fan of the movie A League of Their Own. So when we had a chance to pick a topic, I wanted to do something a little different than out of my comfort zone than what I had done before. So I thought of this topic and I wanted to focus on the All-American Girls Baseball League and what it meant to be a player and how it compared to the men's league at the time, and what the job really meant for a woman at the time. So to start, Philip Wrigley was the one who put this all together. We know him for the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley's Chewing Gum Company. He thought that someone should take the place on the field while a lot of the men were off fighting World War II. He wanted to improve the morale of wartime workers, create some wholesome family entertainment, and keep baseball stadiums filled. He kept the epicenter for baseball right in the Midwest. This was good because gas rationing for the war was very prevalent, so those who were in Midwestern towns couldn't go very far. The first 10 seasons, almost 900,000 patrons came and watched what they called America's Prettiest Baseball Players. When trying out for the league, people said it was more like a Miss America pageant than an actual tryout. They looked for women who were pretty and who could also throw underhand. They looked at women who were from the softball leagues of the time. They looked from Canada, the US, and even Cuba. So it was so important about becoming a All-American Girls Baseball League player was you had to wear a dress, you had to have your hair done before you got on the field. Some women were even known to do it on the field. You had to wear lipstick. They had to follow this guidebook. Before every game, they had to make sure they hit certain marks, and if they didn't, they were fined or even kicked off the team after a certain amount of times. And the people who made sure the players were following these guidelines were chaperones who were dressed in military garments. They watched the women's every move and made sure that they were dressed appropriately and also were acting appropriately. So it was hard with being an All-American Girls Baseball player was you had to hit a certain amount of physical features, but also social features. So you couldn't go out dancing, you couldn't go out at night, you had a curfew at a certain amount of time, be back in the hotel, you couldn't be seen with many boys, you weren't allowed to wear shorts or pants, you always had to wear a skirt, and things like that. But what was so hard for the women was they wanted to kind of be seen like men, so they came up with nicknames like squirt, scourge, dunk, all kinds of interesting things for each other. And no matter how good they were at their game, they were still compared to the men at the time. I have a stat that shows that the women really only made $65 to $125 a week, which means a season they only made $975 to $1,875 a season. The most paid player in 1945 was paid $25,000 a season. And on average, a baseball player at the time was paid $11,000. So one thing with the All-American Girls Baseball players is they were always compared to the men, and they were under this microscope of the public and of their superiors, and they had to do more than just play baseball. They had to be America's symbol at the time for what America was, because that's how we saw baseball. And despite all of that, they still played their game hard. They even had to wear dresses for their games, which they said were you either loved them or you hated them. A lot of girls tried to get home runs so they wouldn't have to slide into a base And when they slid and they got these big injuries, they called them strawberries, because you couldn't refer to anything bloody or gruesome. Everything had to be pretty for the league. So before they even came out of the stadium every day, they had to make sure they were no longer doused in anything that came from the game. You couldn't see any bruises or injuries, no dirt. You had to go into the stadium pretty and come out pretty no matter what happened in the game. So I think what is just so great about these women is no matter how many trials or how many hoops they had to jump through, they still played their game, and they played it really well, as they played it for about 10 years, even after World War II was finished. So thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was very interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Alex?
I do. I'm Richard England, Dean of the Honours College. Very interesting paper. I just was wondering whether newspapers at the time reported on the league as a competitive league, as they would with the men's league, or whether they treated it as a novelty, or maybe the coverage evolved. I don't know. You had a chance to look at that.
Yeah, so they did a little bit of both. They would give you like who won, but they wouldn't tell you like kind of the bad things that happened. One thing that also came with being part of the league is you had to have like a gimmick. So if you've seen A League of Their Own, there's a scene where May tries to go hit to a base, but she does the splits. And that was actually a very common thing to do. Or like wave at the audience, or like find a guy that they would wave at too. So that's something that they would cover, versus like Dottie hitting a home run. It would be more like May did a turn before she got into base, kind of things like that, if that makes sense.
Does anyone else have other questions for Alex? Now, Alex, will you be part of the afternoon activities?
I will. I'm presenting at 3 for the history department.
Excellent. So if you find that anyone has questions, feel free to jump on at 3 o'clock with Alex. And that concludes our undergraduate winners. So I think I am supposed to turn it over to Dr. Boggs, my colleague, and he'll do the graduate level.
Hello, everyone. It's my honor to announce the awardees, or the graduate winners, for the Booth Library Student Research and Creativity Awards. For first place, Nicole Bridges, a history student, won the first place for Mothers, Wives, and Sisters, but also Citizens, defining the duty of female civilians through the publications of the Pankhurst sisters during the Great War. Nicole is unable to attend, but has provided a video, and we'll provide that now on our screen.
I'm not sure we can hear it. Can anybody else hear that?
I cannot hear it right
Oh,
now.
okay, yeah.
See if we can get that corrected.
You're probably going to have to stop the share screen and then redo it with the computer sound selected at the bottom of the left side.
Sorry about that.
Read my abstract a little bit over what. Hello.
There it is. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Nicole Bridges, and I apologize for not being able to be with you live, but I had surgery on Wednesday on my right arm, so everything's been a little bit hazy over the past couple of days. I did want to share, though, my research in regards to the Pankhurst sisters during the Great War. So the title of my paper is Mothers, Wives, and Sisters, but also Citizens, Defining the Duty of Female Civilians through the publications of the Pankhurst sisters during the Great War. The first thing I want to do is kind of read my abstract a little bit over what my paper was about. And so scholars have illustrated that civilians are vital to the success of wartime mobilization, and that each nation and individual had a unique perspective on the duties of their citizens. With the abrupt start to World War I, civilians were forced into a wartime role, which in turn affected their pre-war lifestyle and social roles. Christabel and Sylvia Pankhurst, British suffragettes and sisters, each had a different political perspective of Great Britain's involvement in World War I and their duties as citizens. Each sister used their personal publications dedicated to advancing their opinions. Christabel supported the war effort and patriotism through the Suffragette, while Sylvia was anti-war and illustrated socialist agendas in the Workers' Dreadnought. Through the analysis of each of these publications, this article will demonstrate the differing opinions of wartime mobilization on the home front and a woman's duty as a wartime citizen. So, why I went about looking at this is definitely going to be my personal, interest in women's history, and also because I wrote this last fall in Dr. Elder's modern history seminar over World War I. And one of the things that she had us read was Proctor's Civilians in a World at War, 1914 to 1918. And I found it extremely fascinating because her whole goal was to look at civilians and how their interpretation of a civilian's duty or the duties of being part of that citizenship differed depending on what group you were looking at. And so using that type of mindset and method and my own personal interest in women's history, my goal was to find a research topic that allowed me to analyze differing opinions of what a citizen should do during a war. Well, I stumbled upon these fascinating sisters, these sisters being the Pankhurst sisters, so Christabel and Sylvia, and how they end up becoming extremely estranged before the war even began because of their differing political opinions. So my process is I wanted to understand this Pankhurst family and what the tension was going on between them before I started to dive into their specific differing opinions of being a part of the war and war mobilization. So I started with this broad overview, getting a little bit more of their history and how Emmeline and which is the mother, and then Christabel are going to be very focused on their nationalism and their pride in their country when the war begins. While Sylvia, she's going to start focusing more on how she felt the government needed to support the inequities and start to drive those out of society before we get involved in a world war. And so I focus on their women's movement in Britain and how they're both fighting for this topic and freedom of voting and women's suffrage and developing women's rights, and then look at their publications during the war and how they started to either move away from that original argument of women's suffrage, or did they continue on with that argument and even broaden it further? And so that was my goal, was an analysis on their words of citizenship. And so what I ended up doing was, as I started to look through this, there was commonality amongst the sisters. They both did want that women's movement to continue on, but Christabel is going to kind of put it on the back burner because for her, it was all about this idea of patriotism. And so a citizen's duty was supposed to be focused on being patriotic and mobilizing for war so that their country would remain strong. Sylvia, on the other hand, is going to be speaking out against the war and how the democratic expectations of equality were not met within society. And so isn't it the country's duty then to bring about their own equality before they help and work out all the problems of the world? So it was very interesting looking at them, because you had Christabel, who had the suffragette, which will actually change to Britannia throughout the course of the war, showing that pride in their country. And then you have Sylvia as the women's dreadnought, which actually is going to even broaden more to the workers' dreadnought throughout the war, because now she's like, I'm not just fighting for women, I'm also fighting for the working class. And so my final question that came about, and I would love to have time to research this more, but the question then becomes, where does the line begin between a citizen's duty to their nation when thrust into a global war and the country's responsibility to their citizens and the rights they are entitled to within that country? And I feel like this is going to take a lot more research to answer this, but I found the Pankhurst sisters and their writing to be very interesting and unique in getting a clear, differing perspective, even within one family. So I can imagine if I were to broaden this, how much more depth I would get to understanding their opinions of a civilian's duty during a wartime. Thank you.
Our congratulations again to Nicole, and our thanks to her for recording this video. Our second place graduate winner is James Kowalski, a history student who won second place for Everyone is Suffering, the redefinition of shell shock from curious national concern to conventionalized national baggage in post-World War I Britain. James is in South Korea and couldn't attend, but has provided a video, and we'll share our screen to play that now.
Greetings, fellow Panthers. My name is James Kowalski, and I'm currently a graduate student in the Department of History at EIU, working my way through its wonderful and endlessly fascinating online master's degree program. I apologize for not being able to attend in real time. I'm currently in Seoul, South Korea, where we've been enjoying the final days of the exquisite springtime cherry blossoms. Fortunately, I was allowed to record my message and have it played for this celebration. First, I want to express my deep gratitude to Dean Newell, the Library Advisory Board, Ms. Hildebrandt, and the wonderful library staff for making this award possible and for selecting my work as part of the 2021 Booth Library Awards for Excellence in Student Research and Creativity. The paper I submitted, titled Everyone is Suffering, the Redefinition of Shell Shock from Curious National Concern to Conventionalized National Baggage in Post-World War I Britain, was written for a course I took with Dr. Stacey Elder on World War I last fall. Dr. Elder invited us to explore that conflict as a truly global event, examining a historiographical framework on the topics of citizenship, revolution, violence and brutalization, race and colonialism. Although all of these were challenging in the best sense, it was brutalization that most intrigued me. That is, what did the violence of this conflict, this extreme, anonymized, mechanized, almost incomprehensible, and indeed modern prosecution of violence that characterized the war mean for those who experienced it? How did it affect them, change them? And how did the societies that welcomed home their soldiers now see them differently? In Britain, for example, there were fears that veterans would be prone to unwarranted and even extreme bouts of violence, since brutality had become normalized for them through war. There were also deep sympathies for those who bore the psychological scars of that violence. Shell shock, or what we might call post-traumatic stress disorder today, emerged as part of the public discourse in Britain during and after the war, and quickly became a topic of national importance. In my paper, I explore how shell shock came to be interpreted among a variety of stakeholders, particularly the medical community, popular press, public opinion, and government ministers. What I discovered was that The medical community largely approached shell shock with eager fascination as many sought to determine its causes, symptoms, and possible treatments. The popular press, meanwhile, tended to convey shell shock as a tragic outcome of a nightmare war that had irreparably transfigured the lives of what would otherwise have been young men in the springtime of their youth. Newspapers in particular tended to portray sufferers of shell shock with great sympathy. This, combined with the fact that so many in Britain felt a personal connection to the war through concern for a friend or relative going to fight in it, and the broader public also tended to have a sympathetic view. Among government ministers, however, the response was markedly different. Despite an early period of concern as shell shock was first being recognized as a debilitating condition among soldiers, ministerial and bureaucratic agents alike soon exhibited skepticism and even contempt for those suffering from it. Not exactly what one would expect, is it? Certainly not what I expected to find. And yet that was just the beginning. That was the problem that I sought to answer. Why this turn by the government ministers? What I found was that for then Prime Minister David Lloyd George and other government ministers, shell shock had become a symbol of parasitic laziness that was holding the country back. Britain was facing not only tremendously difficult transition from the wartime command economy to a market-based one, but also a national debt equal to 128% of GDP and militant labor activism that was calling for increased wages and shorter working hours. As many soldiers returning from war were also members of the working class, any excuse for not working was a tempting target of public admonition, since men from the governing, professional, and other upper middle classes enlisted in disproportionately high numbers relative to their populations. As such, after the war, there was little patience by national leaders regarding anyone who appeared to be shirking their duty to king and country, including those claiming incapacitation due to psychological hardship. To put it crudely, economic necessity and the divisions of class identity politics played critical roles in explaining this turn. I don't think I'm alone among my fellow students of history in saying that diving into the research for this project was at least half the fun of the entire endeavor. And being in South Korea, I would not have been successful. This entire project would not have been possible were it not for the robust online resources of Booth Library and the 60 databases for history alone that it offers. Thanks to Andy Kugel for assembling those history resources that are so invaluable, and in my case, to the guidance of Dr. Stacey Elder, who has time and again not only challenged me to do my best, but who clarifies historical questions with a mastery that inspires me. Thank you.
Our thanks to James and our congratulations to James. And now our third place graduate award winner, Carol Bruce Tagoe, an economics student, won third place for Developed Stock Market Integration, New Evidence from the Pre- and Post-Financial Crisis of 2007 to 2009. Carol is with us, and it's wonderful to see Carol today. I'm not.
Hello, everyone. Hi. I was trying to share my screen, but I don't know what happened. So yeah, so I first of all want to express my appreciation to the Booth Library Committee. I'm grateful for this award. And also I want to say a big thank you to you all for being here today. And so my research project was on developed stock market integration. And I actually did this project while doing my MBA with Dr. Chu. And I'm grateful for this award. Yes. So first of all, my motivation for this study came as a result of my personal interest in investment and also in portfolio diversification. And also after watching the documentary on the global financial meltdown, I was also inspired to learn more and also research on this topic. So yeah. So when we talk about stock market integration, we are looking at how equity market indices in different regions are moving together over a long period of time. And so, for example, we are looking at how the S&P 500 index, which is the main equity index for the United States, is moving together with, let's say, the index in Canada, that is the CAC index. So that is the whole idea behind stock market integration. We are looking to see if equity market indices in different countries are moving together in the same direction over a long period of time. Yes, so researchers have found that the advancement of information technology has actually contributed immensely towards the globalization of capital markets. And this has resulted in increased integration amongst the equity markets. And other researchers have also found that financial openness and countries having similar macroeconomic policies have also contributed to stock market integration. So my study specifically looked at how the 2007-2009 financial crisis impacted the relationship between the US with 4 other developed markets. So I was looking at the Canadian markets, the Japanese markets, the Sweden, and then the UK. And I was interested in what kind of relationship the US had with these 4 markets before the crisis, and knowing if the relationship was altered after the financial crisis. So this was my study. And from investment theory, we get to know that if we invest in 2 markets that are positively and perfectly correlated, then the possibility of mitigating risk is reduced, right? However, if the markets are not perfectly and positively correlated, then there's a possibility of mitigating risk. So in this regard, my research is relevant in that aspect. Okay, so I used data from 1995 to 2018, and I divided my data into 2 periods. That's the pre-crisis period and then the post-crisis period. I used the co-integration methodology of Johansson to investigate if a long-run relationship really exists between the 5 markets. And then I used the vector error correction model to determine the nature of the relationship. That is the nature of the short-run relationship, as well as the nature of the long-run relationship between these market indices. So I found that in the short run, the US had a significant positive influence on all the 4 developed markets. And so this is to say that as an investor, if you are thinking of, as a US investor, if I'm thinking of investing in any of these 4 developed markets, in the short period, the possibility of me making diversification gains is reduced. Okay. In the long run, however, I found that the US market was co-integrated with the market of the UK, the Japanese, and then the Canadian markets. Okay. I, however, did not find any co-integration between the US and the UK markets. In the post-crisis period, however, this changed. I realized that the Japanese market lost its co-integration with the US market in the post-crisis period. And I also found that the UK, which was initially not co-integrated with the US, now became co-integrated in the post-crisis period. And I also found that the relationship the US had with the Canadian and the Sweden markets did not change that much after the crisis. Okay, so one would ask, what is the implication of all these results? Like, what does it mean for me? Okay, so as a US investor, if you are thinking of investing, or if you're thinking of investing globally, you would want to consider the Japanese stock market, since it is not co-integrated with the US markets. Okay, so if a US investor has a portfolio of Japanese stocks, there's a possibility of making some diversification gains. However, as a US investor, you wouldn't want to invest in the Swedish market, since it is positively co-integrated with the US market. Okay, so this whole research paper helps an investor know where to diversify. Yes, so overall, my result shows that in the short run, although diversification benefits may not exist, over the long period, diversification gains do exist for investors, for US investors who are thinking of investing globally. And overall, my findings also confirm that national equity markets are interdependent to varying degrees, and that a negative shock, such as a financial crisis, may change the core movements among the national equity markets significantly. So that was it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. We really appreciate that. And I am going to open things up for any questions for Carol. I don't think she will provide stock tips, but she might have responses about her research if we have questions from the audience. Okay, if we don't have questions immediately, Carol, is there a good way for anyone to follow up with you?
Yes, please. I'll put my email address.
Are you typing?
I'll share my email address. So if you have any suggestions, or if you have any way I could make it better, you can just email me.
Thank you, Carol. And if you put that in the chat, everyone will be able to have that information.
Thank you.
So not presenting today are two honorable mentions. These are Tanner Skim, a history student who won honorable mention for Bolshevik Germany, American Perception on the German Revolution. Our congratulations to Tanner Skim. Also winning honorable mention today, Toluwalasi Solomon, a curriculum and instruction student, won honorable mention for Trade Books Contextualization of Consequential Women's Historical Significance. So our congratulations to Tanner again, our congratulations again to Toluwalasi. Our congratulations to Carol again, our congratulations to James, and our congratulations to Nicole. We're very impressed by this work and appreciate the presentations today.
Yeah, thank you all for presenting. I just want to turn it over to the chair of the Library Advisory Board to express his appreciation.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of the students who submitted their research. It was some amazing reading to see what was going on here at Eastern with our students. A special thank you to all of our members of the Library Advisory Board who read all of those submissions for all the work they did. And a special thank you to Beth for coordinating and all of the work that she did in getting those to us, as well as getting them up for the students to submit. It was a great year this year. Despite everything else going on, we had some great research being done. So I wanted to say thank you to everybody.
Well said. Thank you, Professor Coleman. Thank you all, and thank you for attending. It was a pleasure having you here.